Good evening, friends. Welcome to the episode 11 of the Career Shifts podcast. I'm your host, Gopal, and I'm super excited to have all of you tuning in to this episode. For those who have been here before, you know this already. But for those who are joining us for the first time, Career Shifts is a podcast where we explore the journeys of people who have successfully navigated significant career shifts. But before we dive into today's episode, as always, I wanted to continue our tradition of starting the show with a story, a reflection rather today. Personally, it's been an exciting week for me. I've just joined Gladwell Academy, a company that specializes into safe and agile consulting and training. Coincidentally, our guest today brings a wealth of expertise on agile talent, which is a perfect fit for today's episode. Not so long ago, after spending almost about 16 years of my career focusing on one aspect of HR, which is global mobility, I decided to take plunge into something very different, which is managing future of work initiative. Typically, when people transition into a new role, they bring some basic skills, understanding, and knowledge. But in my case, I was taking over a new role with very little known knowledge or documentation. So I knew I had to take the plunge without knowing how to swim. I had the great fortune of working with some great minds, best minds rather, in the organization, but there was no playbook per se. As I progressed through the journey, I read quite a lot of articles, white papers on the future of work and gig economy until I bumped into this book that changed my entire perspective. Gig economy, as we all know, is about engaging freelancers and consultants for various roles within the organization. Despite this being a great concept, very few organizations have been able to adapt and adopt to it fully. There are concerns about IP, apprehensions about the quality of work, etc. This book, Agile Talent, beautifully weaves in insights from deep research and provides a framework on how organization can work with freelancers with ease. When I read this book, I was able to design and develop structures and also had the fortune of speaking to the author, who happens to be the guest on the show today, Jon Younger. John is often referred to as Godfather of freelance revolution. I can't disagree to that a bit. When I spoke to him a few weeks ago and told him that I run a podcast called Career Shifts and invited him to be my guest, he immediately agreed because he believes that this is something that needs to be discussed a lot more. Today, we will delve into who, what, how of freelancing with John. So stay tuned and enjoy the show. John, thank you for being here on the show today. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Gopal. It's an honor to be on the Career Shifts podcast. And I must tell you, you are a wonderful moderator. You sound like the Fareed Zakaria of freelancing, or perhaps he's the Gopal Iyer of world events.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that compliment. And I try to get better at every episode that I host. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Before we get into the main topic of today's conversation, and it's an interesting times that we are all going through with the world shifting in terms of employment. Business cycles are very different today. Startup ecosystem is having a very different impact on the world across. We'll get into all of that in a bit, but do you want to quickly introduce yourself to the
Sure.
audience that is tuning in and listening to this podcast?
I would be delighted to, and thank you for the opportunity. I guess with reference to what I'm doing now, I had spent 30 years as a professor at the University of Michigan, at ISB in India, at the National University of Singapore, and some other places, and got excited after 30 years of working with HR organizations, working on transformation for large corporates. I just got very excited about what we've called the freelance revolution. And I've gotten excited because it's a significant and meaningful change in how people are thinking about their careers, people thinking about their work, and thinking about their future. And there was nobody writing about that stuff when I started. And I thought, gee whiz, maybe I can be the Margaret Mead of this ethnographic revolution. I'm not as good a writer as Margaret Mead. I'm certainly not as deep a thinker as she is, but she was a good influence. And for the last 10 years, I've been trying to tell the stories of the freelance revolution as best I can, both at the individual level, the organizational level, and as an industry beginning to develop and mature. Other than that, the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a full-time grandfather, a full-time father, a full-time husband, and the rest of me is part-time.
Wonderful way of putting that. I was going to ask about that, but you ended it really well. So thank you. I think that's a fantastic background and speaks volumes about the work that has gone in, and also some of the conversations that we've had in the last couple of years.
Sure.
Also really speaks volumes about, one, how the freelance revolution started. And you're right, there has been very little that has been written about it. A lot of people have written, but written it from a very different perspective.
Yes.
I think from a freelancing perspective, we are probably where employment was in 1900s or even before.
Yeah.
So it is here to evolve, and we need more and more conversations, research, insights, dialogues to support that entire piece. So Jon, you are often referred to as the godfather of freelance revolution. And that is also because there is a lot of work that has gone into in terms of research that you have done as well.
Yes. Yeah.
At the end of the day, how have you seen this world evolve? What triggered it? And what kind of has been the last few years of your experience in the freelancing domain, if you can share some light on that?
Sure. There's a macro and a micro perspective, and
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about that. From a macro perspective, we're in the second or third inning. I mean,
Sure.
that's kind of the reality. We have, as if you think about the sort of the history of freelancing, and not go all the way back to freelancing in Roman days and in England days, and Ivanhoe being the first reference to freelancers. If we sort of bring it up to the present, what we know is that we have progressed from job boards, which were the foundation of freelancing, if I may put it that way, in the sort of the mid between 2000 and 2010. We saw the early development of platforms kind of around the end of that decade. We saw interesting organizations getting started around the beginning of the second decade, Upwork being the combination of Elance and Odesk. We saw Fiverr go public. We saw Upwork, the result of that merger, going public. We've seen Freelancer, which now has 59 million participants, 59 million experts on its platform, which, by the way, is somewhat larger than the nation of Saudi Arabia. It would be 41st among countries if freelancer.com was a country. So wow. What have we learned? What we've learned is that we are an easy sell for freelance, for early stage companies and for startups. Some small and medium-sized companies as well. Why? Because they have less money, they have less opportunity, they have less reputation to attract employees, and so they have more need for contingent staff. And as their funding starts to impact how they do, they've got more need for flexibility in their staffing. And we provide all of that. So if you sort of think about freelancing from a macro perspective, we're an alternative to full-time hires, which makes tremendous sense in certain areas where we don't need people all the time. We don't need those skills all the time. We have limitations in terms of cost. We have changes in terms of the way in which we're developing our companies, and all of those say freelancing makes sense. Here's the rub. It's a change. And because it's a change, and because change represents uncertainty, and because uncertainty represents risk, it's been very tough for big corporates to sign on, except on an exceptional basis. That doesn't mean that they're not using freelancers, but it means they're not using freelancers at scale in the kind of organized way that grows this industry. So
Right.
what does that mean? If that's the macro perspective, what's the micro perspective? And the micro perspective is that about 60% of folks that are freelancing now weren't freelancing 3 or 4 years ago. The actual numbers are 90% increase in full-time, 130% increase in side gigs or part-time moonlighting, etc., reaching, if for the US at least, about 60 to 70 million folks. The expectation that freelancing will represent more than half of the total workforce in the US, I think, is fanciful. I don't believe that will happen. But, you know, it's nice to see the potential is rising. What is it that people want from freelancing? They want choice, they want agency, the ability to have impact, and they want flexibility. Those are the things that are driving the choice from full-time work to the choice of becoming a freelancer. 60% of these folks overall are pleased with or satisfied with how they're doing financially and the kinds of work they're getting. 38 to 40%, not so much. Why is that the case? Well, the first most important case, and we'll get into this later is in detail, is that freelancers hate selling. Freelancers are introverts in many respects. They don't enjoy asking for business. They don't want to talk about money. They want all that to happen magically, and it doesn't happen magically. So the people that are good at freelancing are the people that are thinking about it as a business, not as a craft. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind. As we move into more AI, what we're going to find is that an awful lot of the work that freelancers have historically done will be replaced by bots. But we'll also find lots of opportunities for freelancers to do more and different things as a result of AI. As Pat Petiti, who runs Catalant, put it, AI puts a firm at the disposal of every freelancer. That's a powerful thing. Now, the question is how many of us know how to use that and how many of us will use it successfully. That's a separate issue. But as we dig into this stuff more deeply, Gopal, you know, let's talk about what it is that folks need to do to have a satisfying career, whether it's in freelancing or it's in a transition from freelancing to full-time or full-time to freelancing. All of those are topics that are worth exploring.
Absolutely. And we will explore each one of that because you brought in some really interesting perspectives on what it meant or means for the organizations as well as what it means for freelancers. And I couldn't stop but to smile at the comment that you made about freelancers not liking how to sell, which is a reality. And I have seen that happen quite a bit. I had a perspective on that, which I will definitely bring in. But before we get to that part, I think people have started tuning into this and have started sharing their comments.
Welcome.
Welcome, Sudeep. Sudeep, though, anyone who is joining and listening to this, please let us know which city you're joining us from. We'll take the questions as they come along, and I'm sure you will find a lot of value in what you're going to listen in the next 60 minutes. John, the evolution per se that you explained just now, there is often this comment that people make that, oh, gig economy is great in the West. It's never happening to the scale at which it happens in countries like Europe and US or Canada. But in India, we are still going to have a lot of people wanting full-time jobs. Now, this is on both the sides. Aspirationally, people in India prefer full-time jobs. And from an organization perspective, there is also a tendency to only offer employment. Now, there is also a shift that I'm seeing, which is from a multi-generational workforce perspective. One of the biggest differences that I see is the fact that a lot of countries in the West predominantly go by per hour rate cards. And in India, we have not done that as yet. we still go by monthly salaries methods. And I feel personally, having worked in this domain for the last several years, I feel this is one of the biggest reasons why there is discouragement of taking freelancers on board. What are your views on that particular topic? Do you see a shift happening, one, in Asia? And two, what do you think organizations and freelancers should do differently to start, reaping benefits of this entire
Sure. You know,
thing? Yeah.
I was thinking about that a lot, and I guess I've got a few reactions. I think that every economy goes through a maturity cycle, and this is no different in Asia. What we're experiencing is that as Asian industry matures, moves into tech, moves into marketing and services, moves into more greater consulting, we're seeing the big companies that are growing India as a force in the world recognize the need to have a combination or a blended workforce. Let me describe what that means. I mean, the reality is that when you think about the purpose of freelancing, the purpose of a freelancing platform, what is that really? Well, what it really is the chance to identify and access skills that are not immediately obvious to you. So I need a place to go when I need somebody on robotics, or I need a place to go when I need somebody to teach me how to be large, I forgot what they were called, but the large tech projects that are so important in the big companies. Companies in India, companies in Vietnam, companies in Japan, companies in China are all experiencing that they have labor gaps, that they have talent gaps, that have expertise gaps. The first stage in a freelancing economy is filling gaps. At some point, those same organizations understand that they're not just filling gaps, they're actually building a more agile workforce. But you don't do that until you've run out of the value of filling gaps per se. So we're now in Asia at the very beginning of that second cycle, which is to think in terms of blended rather than thinking in terms of just filling gaps versus only freelancers. And at some point, what you start to see are organizations that have found that they can be more remote oriented and work effectively, that they can be more hybrid and work effectively, that they can have a mix of full-time, freelance, et cetera, and work effectively. And what we're seeing, for example, in India is the case of UST, which has been one of the great organizations that really have appreciated the potential for freelancing and have made that a part of their standard workforce operating. So that's the first step. That's at the macro level, which is organizations are going to go through this process. And our challenge is to make it less difficult. If you want to think about it, fundamentally, our job is to get out of the way and to provide the simplicity and efficiency of making access to part-time or contingent labor more available. That's the first part. Second part, and we'll talk about the specifics of that in a minute.
Sure.
The platforms have a lot of work that they need to do to make that happen. Second thing, in the case of India specifically, is you just have so many people in tech that right now you're overburdened by the supply, right? There are, as the World Economic Forum 2 years ago estimated that there were 1 million more tech experts in India than India could absorb. It's a very important question. So how do you deal with that? Now you've got to get to the individual side. What is the individual side around that? Well, if you're one of the 30 to 40% that are not happy with being a freelancer, here are some things that you can do. And we're going to make an interesting point following that. You can think long and hard about whether what you offer is in demand. There are an awful lot of people that are offering services that are going to be replaced in the next year or two by a bot. Don't offer those services. That doesn't make sense. What is your special offer? What is it that you do best or better than anybody else? And that is the challenge for every freelancer. By the way, it's also the challenge for every employee to understand their superpower. And if they don't have a superpower, to build that superpower, to invest in that superpower, because at the end of the day, people not only need particular skills, but they need those skills at a high level. One of our challenges in India and some of Asia is we don't do as good a job of certifying people as we should.
Sure.
And so it's very important. If you think about the way in which Japan moved from being described as the place where cheap stuff was made in the 1950s to where the best stuff in the world was made by the year 2000, freelancers in India have the same challenge. We have to demonstrate that we are the best in the world, not just okay, and certainly not just available. Second thing is it's really important that we teach our folks the skills of entrepreneurship. It's hard for me to ask for business, but I learned how to do it. And if we don't learn how to do it, and if we don't learn how to demonstrate that we are not only ready for business, but we bring unique skills and unique work practices, well, we're not going to get the job. Third, one of the problems in freelancing is that we think of ourselves as independent of anybody else. Even though we join these communities, we end up thinking of the other community members as competitors rather than collaborators. We have to learn as freelancers to organize ourselves at multiple levels. One is organizing ourselves so that we're a force economically and politically, but the other is organizing ourselves so that we're working with others to attract work that may be larger than just us. So organizing ourselves as hunting parties, you might call it, looking for work together, working on each other, building those sort of mini agencies, if I may put it that way, or mini teams that allow us to be more than the sum of our individual parts is absolutely critical. And right now, what we know is that we're making a fundamental mistake too much of the time, which is I want the work of my platform, but I don't want to share the work I'm getting separate from the platform, which means if I'm not sharing, nobody's sharing with me. That is not a smart move. Freelance platforms need to do a much better job of not only increasing the quality of their entrepreneurial skills of their members, but also helping them to organize to go after larger projects, more interesting projects, and richer projects. That's a lot to unpack, I know, and I talk quickly.
No, I think I mean a lot of thoughts in terms of what you just said is coming out of the entire reflection of how the industry has evolved, as well as how each and every stakeholder has a role to play. Talking of which, you made a very interesting point. India today sits at an excess of talent than what it could absorb. And I think there is a related question that has come in, which I'm going to read, is by Venkat Krishnamurthy. He
Sure.
says, "Hi, Gopal and John, great to watch this discussion. Just had a related question or a discussion point that Gopal is talking about. How can a freelancer in India get contracted by organizations in the Western economy? Thanks much." I'm just going to take a little more expansion of this question, which is, on one side, there are platforms in India that are available, which allows people to work. And we'll get into a platform conversation in a bit, but
Sure.
and it's a long one, and I'm sure it's going to take a lot of time on that part as well. But before we get into the platform part, the most important challenge that people in India face is lack of availability of opportunities within the country, which means that they have to look for opportunities outside. Lack of awareness of avenues that are available, number one. Number two, the whole mindset and the entrepreneurial aspects of how to set themselves up for global opportunities. That's one side of the problem. The second side of the problem is, of course, how is the world looking at talent coming from India in such platforms?
Good.
And is there something that needs to be done differently? So if you can just look into that part a little bit, that would really help.
Sure. Let me give context around that. And some of this data is old, so I wonder if it's still the case. What I read a couple of years ago was about 2/3 of the freelance work done by Indian experts, professionals, was work done for markets either of London or the US, UK or US, 2/3.
Wow.
So one of the things is you guys are over concentrated. That's the first thing. You know from your time as a partner at EY, as a managing director, that when you've got 2/3 of your eggs in one basket, you got a problem. So let's start there. The second thing is, excuse me, I don't know how well the platforms representing, well, maybe that's the first point, which is it's really hard to do this on your own unless you're a big shot, unless you have a fabulous reputation in India, unless you're seen as like the number one guy or gal in a certain area. It's tough to work internationally alone unless you've built your reputation. So let's start there. And that is, what do I do to build a reputation, right? And the answer is, I'm a public pain in the ass. That's what I am. So there's a nary a day comes along where I don't post something on LinkedIn because I know that my 15 minutes of fame gets 14, 13, 12, 11 with every day that passes. So I want people to know who I am because I want people to send me great stories and I want to tell great stories. And the only way to do that is by being in front. So the first question I'd ask of the freelancers that are thinking about, work internationally, et cetera, or even just work in general is, how well are you asking for that work? How well are you representing yourself as somebody that can solve a problem? Second question, don't tell me your skill. Tell me the problem that you can solve better than anybody else, because I only hire you when I have a problem. I don't hire you because you're a pretty face or have expertise. I hire you because I've got to get something done that I don't know how to get done internally. So how well are you in my face so that when I make the decision, you are there? There was a fellow, I can't remember his name. My wife got a call one day. I'll tell you a funny story. My wife got a call one day while I was out several years ago. And the guy said, and I wish I could remember it, but I don't. I'm an old guy. And he said, could I speak to Jon? And Carolyn said, well, he's not here right now. Can I take a message? And he said, I'm so-and-so. And Carolyn said, well, does he know you? And he goes, well, I don't think he knows me personally, but I used to be the Secretary of Agriculture for the United States, and I could use his help. So, Dad, that was his name, Dad. And that came because I've been putting myself out there for a long time. And when it came time for him to be CEO of the Academy of Motion Pictures, right, that does like Oscars and stuff like that, he knew about me. He knew about me from other work that I had done. He knew about me from my LinkedIn. He knew about me from articles that had written about me. He had a wonderful story that I'll share with you. He goes, his dad said, Dan, when opportunity strikes, you must step up to it, hop to it, hop to it. And Dan goes, there was a kid at the time, he said, well, how will I know when opportunity strikes? And the dad goes, you won't. So you got to keep hopping because it will come along. There's a good message there. One of the things that I do on a daily basis is I hop. I tell people about what I'm doing. I tell people about what I'm thinking, and I do it in a way that responds to their needs, what they're worried about right now. If every freelancer was to have enough of a public image that described what they did, that was terrific, described the solutions that they've been able to create, describe their experience, describe their problem-solving capabilities, and the results that they've achieved, they're going to do a whole lot better. So that's the first thing. You gotta be out there. The second thing is, you got to hang out with other people who are more successful than you in the areas where you want to be successful. So I get wonderful emails on a regular basis from people in India and elsewhere saying, I'd like to talk to you about my stuff, because what they want is an article, or they want a mention, or they want something else. And the people that get that mention that I'm interested in are people that tell me something that's more than I want this. They're people that say, here's an interesting story that might be good for you. Here's an experience that I had that was really helpful. Here's a way in which I've made a difference. And not just, how do I get an article in Forbes, which is the question that I almost always get. Don't send notes like that. Those are stupid. Nobody's interested in why you think you should be on Forbes. What I'm interested in as a Forbes writer is, what's your story, and is it worth telling, and would people find that interesting? Third, we have got to teach people in our platforms the skills of being entrepreneurs. Very important. You've got to generate an appreciation for what it means to be a better entrepreneur, not just a better developer. And fourth, you got to think 5 to 10 years ahead, and that's the hardest thing. Talk to your friends, personal hackathons, whatever it is that you do. You must have a sense for where the world is moving, not where it's been, but where it's going. And you've got to position yourself at the intersection of where it's been and where it's going, in a way that causes people to say, wow, I need to talk to that guy because he's got something that I don't have, or that lady who's really thinking about something in a meaningful and important way that I haven't yet. Do those 4 things, you'll get plenty of work. Don't do those 4 things, you're just another guy waiting for the phone to ring.
Interesting perspective. And is going to lead me to ask you another question on this. Shifting to platforms now.
Sure.
We spoke about this before we started the conversation. There are a lot of platforms in the world that kind of allows people to pick freelancing work. I know for a fact that at one point of time, LinkedIn was also contemplating on starting a freelancers platform for itself, but I don't know what happened to it and where it is right now.
Which is an interesting statement, isn't it? Because this is the 4th time they tried, and they have never succeeded, because they are seen as a place where full-time jobs are negotiated, but not contingent.
Correct. So that kind of creates another interesting, hard to say if it is a problem, but it is in many ways for people who are applying or seeking opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, let's take a look at any large platforms today, and I wouldn't get into the names, but any large platforms today, they have millions of people on the platform. One of the things that I'm really interested to know is what has been the utilization. So you may be sitting at 100,000 people on the platform, but how many people have you really been able to give work to? When you get deeper into that conversation, what you realize is a lot of data or a lot of profiles on the platform are not really the kind of profiles that would attract good kind of work. And you touched upon that in a bit in your earlier response. Again, 2 questions. 1, what should platforms do differently to be successful platforms in being able to get meaningful engagements to people? 2, what should individuals do differently? I know you've responded that to a bit in your earlier response, but if there is anything that we can give as an advice to people who are on platforms and seeking work on platforms, what could they do differently?
Sure.
To be successful?
This is our low-tech moment here. There we go.
Okay.
Folks, if you've seen this, I will send you the deck if you're interested. But what you see are the 3 things that platforms need to do. They need to help freelancers be better freelancers. They need to help clients to be better clients. And they need to deliver a better platform experience overall to both of those groups. So let's sort of dig into what that means about helping freelancers be better freelancers.
Yeah.
One of the things that means, besides the stuff that we've already talked with, is understanding the growth cycle of freelancers. And I'll share a little bit of data. And that is, we did a very large global survey in 2021, And one of the things that we asked was people at various stages of freelancing, less than a year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, etc. How are they thinking about their freelance experience? And what we found was that there were kind of 4 stages to a freelancer's experience. The first was, can I make it? Right? And in that first year that they're working, many of them are not very happy, and about half of them end up leaving freelancing and going to full-time work. So if you take a look at what people say is freelancing an attractive career opportunity, people with less than a year, only 30% say yes. And the question that they're asking is, can I make it? Can I build the expertise needed? Can it provide the quality of life that I want? Can I achieve my financial goals? Can I build relationships with interesting colleagues and interesting clients? And can I solve the challenging problems that come up? And what we see in the first year is that people are quizzical. They're not sure. And again, what I said is about half of them leave freelancing because they don't think they can make it. But if they've lasted for a year, their optimism redoubles. And all of a sudden, they see the potential after a tough first year. So what's the first thing a platform can do? Help people with the first year. Help them to experience early success. Help them to build the skills. Help them to ask for business. Help them to understand the purpose of a platform. And let's take a minute on that. The purpose of a platform is that it's an interactive, hopefully good experience that connects you with a yellow pages of contingent labor. It is not made for the success of freelancers. It is made for clients to identify resources that they can use that they do not have access to themselves. That's the job. In making that work, they provide administrative services for freelancers, like helping them with pay, helping them with other stuff. They're also supposed to help in other ways, helping them with development, helping them with skills, helping them with training, and providing a community for them to build a micro community for themselves. But what we're saying, Gopal, is it's the freelancer's obligation to turn this platform into something that works for them. Don't wait. What we know is that if they make it in the first year and they stick within the first year, in the next 1 to 3 years, they're feeling pretty good. Attractiveness increases from 30% to 48%. Almost 50% are feeling good. 50% feel like they're building expertise. 50% feel like the quality of life is happening. And they're saying to themselves, I can make it. I can make it. I can make this happen. And then they hit about 3 to 5 years and they go, yeah, I can, but do I want to? Is this really the career for me? And it turns out that the attractiveness career opportunity in those next 3 to 5 years goes down again. It goes to 34. So again, 30%, 48%, 34%, as people are asking the question, I know how to do this, but is this my future? And what we see is, again, a number of people leave freelancing because they've decided responsibly that that's not where their career lives is they're thinking. And then at 5 years, we see people in the 4th stage saying, I can make it, and I want to make it, and this is what I want to be doing. And a big jump in terms of freelancing support, a big jump in terms of satisfaction, a big jump in terms of quality of life, because they're starting to describe. So what is it that freelancing platforms need to do? They need to understand the cycle of growth and development for freelancers and support them, that they're not only in the business of supporting clients, they're also in the business of supporting freelancers. What do we need to do to then help clients be better clients? And I want to just share some data. We did a wonderful little pilot study on risk factors as enterprises perceive them. And I want to describe the top 4 risk factors that freelancers perceive enterprises have. First is they're worried about IP risk. Are you going to take my stuff? Second, they're worried about compliance risk. Am I going to be sued? Am I going to have a big payment to the US government or anybody else because I haven't managed compliance well? Third is outcome risk, which is, is there any risk that I'm going to pay you a lot of money and then you're going to leave me in the middle, or you're not going to get it done, or you're only hours, you're not outcomes, which, by the way, is a big change in freelancing. We used to sell hours. Now we sell outcomes. Big difference.
Wow. Yes.
Fourth point, which is really interesting, is the fourth biggest risk factor is what we've called new to me risk. New to me risk is the client's view. I don't know what I'm getting into. I don't know how to do this right. Protect me. If you cannot protect me, if you cannot ensure that I'll be successful through this, that I won't be fired by hiring you, then I'll hire you. But if you can't show me how you'll protect me and my career, you're out. One of the top four, and we're not thinking in those terms. So what is it that we've got to do in helping our clients? We've got to understand their risk factors. Flexing It in India does a very nice job in helping clients assess their readiness for freelancing. That's a really important thing. We've got to teach clients to be better clients. In our data, less than 50% of freelancers think that their clients are effective clients, that they really understand how to work effectively with freelancers. And an even smaller percentage, like 45%, think that the internal project managers they work with understand how to work with freelancers. Those are big numbers. We've got to share insights, client appreciation on the value of freelancers, and we've got to provide freelancers with the tools they need to help their clients to plan and work effectively. We've got to help freelance platform members understand that it's a partnership with the platform, not a service relationship. So lots of stuff. And then the third piece, when we get to it, is we've just got to be smarter about building platforms that make it easy, make it efficient, make it simple for us to sign on. And what we know is that that's an area where AI can help enormously. Just one example, and that is the thing that worries so many freelance platforms is scoping. That it takes so much time to scope and rescope because the client hasn't really thought about it. Oh, this is too much money. Oh, this isn't enough. All of that stuff. Gigged AI and a couple of other firms around, like Gigged AI, but they were the first, have really done a nice job of helping, building an AI bot that really, AI app, that really helps clients to understand how to do a better job of scoping the project, the goals, and budget. And that's one of many areas where platforms can really help the relationship between platform, individual freelancer, and of course the client. That's a mouthful, and I'm sorry to have given you that much.
No. It's just triggering a lot more thoughts.
Sure.
And one of that is an extremely interesting challenge that you may have heard from a lot of people is, yes, we know what we need to do. Unfortunately, it comes at a cost, and we don't know who's going to pay for it. And often the reasons why people don't do what you're asking in terms of what the platform should do or what the ecosystem should support in manner is because I think a lot of what you're asking is perceived to be something which is to be done by someone but not me, because I don't know if there is anyone who's going to pay me for this. So that also, by the way, is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of freelancers to create it as a business opportunity for themselves and make their make their opportunity for helping other freelancers do their jobs well. So anyone listening in, feel free.
We actually have data on this. May I share a little bit of data, because I thought you'd find it interesting.
Sure.
So Malt is a great company. Its work is operating most of Europe, and they did a nice survey earlier this year. And I liked one particular slide. By the way, I wrote an article on reporting on this thing. So if people want to look up Jon Younger, Forbes, look up Malt, you'll find the report on this particular survey. And one of the data points was really interesting. So if you take a look across Europe, I don't have Indian data, but I have European data. In general, freelancers who are breaking down their week say about 30 to 34 hours, or 3/4 to 7/8 of their time is spent at work, build work. Great. How much time are they spending in prospecting or networking? How much time, Gopal, would you want the average freelancer to spend on an average week? 5%, 10%, 20%? What would you think?
Should be at least about 10 to 15%.
And it's exactly 10%. And that's how much time they're spending in prospecting or networking. My view is that's not enough. It really isn't. It really isn't. These guys should be doubling the amount of time, which means we need to teach them how to do this stuff. And then if you think about skills development, it's another 10%. So we've sort of got 80. It really think of it as 70% work, 10% networking, prospecting, client development, 10% skill development, and about 10% administrative stuff. That's wonderful. But what we know is that so many freelancers spend so much of their time working that they come back to an empty future because they're not thinking about filling the bucket while they're thinking about emptying the bucket by working. So big message around that one is you got to put more time into your next 6 months. And I'll give you an example of that, which I think is a fabulous example. Just one little thing. Catalant is a big freelance marketplace for independent consultants, as you know. It's got about 130,000 consultants on their platform. But they do a very interesting thing in a sort of a forward, proactive way. Every 6 months, the leadership of Catalant goes to every client and says, what are you thinking about for the next 6 months? And how can I reserve the expertise that you need so that when you're ready to do this, we're ready to support you? What a brilliant thing that could be applied at every level, whether it's a platform, an individual, talking about the future rather than asking, what do you got for me today? And I would suggest that if all we did as a freelance community is to ask our clients, what are you thinking of over the next 6 months? How can we be there when you need it? A. B, how do we make sure that we're bringing what's new to our clients each time? Nobody wants to talk to the guy about the same thing 3, 4, 5 times. You want to bring in something new. So what are you learning that will be relevant and interesting to your clients, that will provoke a reputation, that will provoke an opportunity, that will provoke a connection that turns into interesting work?
Wonderfully said. And I think you're right. And in many ways that we are looking at, even the education system, we're teaching students the whole new concepts of, or the concepts of, how to do business, what to do in terms of finance, marketing, HR. But one thing we're not doing enough, and I completely agree with you, we are not doing enough, is to teach them to be a good entrepreneur and develop their own business. And I think that's going to be a interesting journey ahead.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah,
let me switch. So I want to interview for 1 second. And that is, you spent some time doing some really interesting stuff with the IIMs. And I think it's not lost on anybody that there isn't a population that's smarter than the IIMs. I mean, there's just genius found. But one of the things that I wondered is that there are all of these entrepreneurial programs that are out there in the world. And I know that the IIMs have a good one. But is there a program variation for the solopreneur? So, I mean, in a lot of ways, the difference between an entrepreneurial program and a solopreneur program is scale. Now, for universities, scale is important because that means that people will give larger amounts of money if they're successful. So, I mean, obviously, we know about universities and their need for dough. But have the IIMs or anyone else, in your opinion, sort of thought about what a solopreneurial major might be within an entrepreneurial program I don't know whether there's a market for it, but it sure would be a helpful thing to give people, just a few courses in how to do some of the very things that we're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, so the answer to that is no.
Yeah.
We don't really have a very good structured curriculum that focuses on solopreneurship, unfortunately. There are elements of it, which is part of
Yes.
the mainstream education offering, but not anything which is dedicated to create a solopreneur. I had in my earlier role with EY try to do that. In fact, built a
Remember.
curriculum that I could. We ran it through NASCOM for about 500 women, and our dear friend Ashok Pamidi helped us further that entire effort. We had aspirations to convert that into a wonderful offering, but there were no takers at that point of time.
Yeah.
But this is still 4 years ago. Maybe today there is.
I wonder.
And if there is,
I wonder.
if there is a merit in reviving that, I would be definitely interested to do that, and we can see if we can do something around that. But yeah, to answer your question, there is a huge need to do a lot of work on focusing on solopreneurs, and we aren't doing as much. And in fact, that is what is hurting the entire population that today, unfortunately, is finding itself in a situation where they haven't done enough in terms of skills. They haven't really done enough in terms of upskilling, reskilling, unlearning, relearning.
Yeah.
And when they are in a displaced market, which is when they get laid off, unfortunately, find themselves in a really hard spot of not being able to find opportunities while they keep looking for full time, eventually find themselves waiting out for 6 months to a year and then realizing that they need to go solo. And there is nothing that is available to help them out to find solopreneurship opportunities. So, worth exploring this further. One question that I had from Sudipto Saha earlier: what will it take mid-size and large firms engaging expertise available in freelancers? So I guess what would it take them to make work with freelancers?
I think the answer is pretty specific. And let me show you this stuff if I can find it. Sorry. Where is this? Hold on. Nah, I can't find it. So let's talk about it for a minute.
Sure.
Here's the simple answer to how you can build an enterprise. There are two parts to delivering an enterprise solution, right? The first is having a great solution, and the second is having the reputation that makes that great solution believable.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really, really smart people out there who aren't seen as credible because they don't have that market image that are needed to do that. I get a lot of calls every week for all kinds of stuff that I don't know how to do. I mean, I've gotten 3 calls this week or 3 notes this week saying, we're a young platform. We'd like to raise money. We're a young platform. We're thinking of selling ourselves. We're a young platform. We've got to get more business with large enterprises. What is your advice? And in all cases, my response is, have you positioned yourself so that anybody would be interested in hiring you? All I've done is been out there, and people know what I know how to do, and they know what I know because I make that very claim. If people don't know who you are, if you don't have a reputation, if you're not seen as good at something that they need done, why would they hire you? We did a workshop in Germany a couple of months ago. It was so much fun. And by the way, my recommendation is Freelance Unlocked is something that I hope other people will take on. It's a wonderful notion of really bringing freelancers together for a couple of days of learning and fun. And in that I ran a workshop. 50 people came to the workshop. And the question that every one of them had to answer is, what makes you special? What makes you certain that people would want to hire you, and for what? And we actually went around the room. Every person had to answer. And I think only about 5 people could do it. I think about 45 of those 50 people were either embarrassed or demure or didn't know what the hell to say. And
Wow.
so if you've got that, and these are good folks, they're obviously making some money because they came to the conference, which was $500. I mean, so that they're making some money somehow, but they're counting on the client to define them rather than defining themselves to the client. And that's the first major miss. You don't want the client to define you because they're going to define you in the context of what they know other people to do. You want to be standing out, not one of the crowd. So what are you good at? And how are you telling the world that you're good at it? And how are you getting your clients or your friends of reinforcing that message so it's not just coming from you? It's a very simple thing, whether you're building a company or you're selling yourself or you're just trying to make friends. It's the same old stuff, which is, why would anybody want to work with you? You've got to answer that question or you will not get the work.
Wonderful. A lot of realizations. I think it's worth really. And then this is a theme. I mean, every individual who has been a guest on my podcast has reiterated this multiple times: the importance of personal brand, the importance of having a value proposition, the importance of being open to share about what you have done in a manner that allows the clients to see the value that you bring onto the table. So I think what you're reiterating is the need of that for a freelancer community becomes a lot more, because that's the only way that they are going to quantify and qualify you for doing the job.
I think that's right. And I've never been part of a freelance community. I've written about many, but I think the only ones I've joined are the ones where I've been an advisor and I have some equity. Yeah. And so, because that's not where my work comes from. My work comes from people writing me or calling me and saying, we'd like your help. So how do you create that situation? Well, one thing you got to keep in mind is I've been doing this for a long time. I'm the oldest freelancer on the planet. I mean, it's me and some of the dinosaurs. So I've got a reputation that I built over time, but I've built it very carefully, and I've built it very slowly and significantly focused on the 2 or 3 areas where I think people find it interesting to read. So I there's nothing special about me. I just happen to do what we all kind of know you're supposed to do, and we all kind of know what you're supposed to do. It's just that some of us would prefer not to do it. Well, if you prefer not to do it, the consequence is that you're going to get less of the stuff that you want because you haven't stepped up.
Wonderfully said. I have an interesting question from Brandon Lee. He's joining us from Singapore. Hi, Brandon. Thank you for joining. I know it's quite late there, but you still joined, so thank you for that. What he's asking is, do you believe that governments have a role in supporting growth and maturation of freelance market, or should it be left to the platform?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you think government have a role in supporting growth and maturity of freelance market?
Gotcha.
Or should it be left to platforms in the open market to get better, for freelancers to learn to how to be better entrepreneurs, and for companies to realize what value they could unlock using freelance talent? Now, as you answer that question, I would definitely want to add an element from what we have been seeing in India. So we have a new social security code, which has been in the works since 2020. The rules are being written. People are still very apprehensive about how it would unfold, or what would it mean for a blue-collar job versus a white-collar job, and how would contracts be treated differently, etc. So there is a lot of confusion, and as things stand, it's a status quo.
Yeah,
I've always believed that a free market is always good, because it allows people in the marketplaces to kind of differentiate themselves by doing that. But for a country like us, which is 140 crore people, it often is a challenge in not having a guidance, and there is an expectations that the government has a role to play. And I'm sure this is the same case across the world as well. Do you
Sure.
really see there is a role for government to play in this?
Yes. I mean, I think the role that they should play is to get out of the way and stop stop beating on freelancing. So let's remember what there was George Carlin, who you might remember as a wonderful comedian, used to tell this story, and he used to say, and forgive me, folks, if some of this seems rude or inappropriate, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. So George Carlin goes, think about God. God is an old man up in the cloud who loves you and needs money. That's government, right?
Mm.
At the end of the day, what the government wants to do more than anything else is not piss off, not annoy its constituents, and they want tax dollars. And the problem with freelancing is it's not as easy to collect tax dollars for freelancers as it is to collect tax dollars for employees through withholding. And withholding was created after the Second World War by the United States. I apologize to all other people in all other countries for the creation of withholding, but it's upon us. And the consequence is we've got to make it easy for government to collect its share if what we want is a buoyant freelance market. And they're going to beat us up until we find a way to pay our fair share. That's the first. We've got to understand the politics. We've got to understand that freelancing is a large community that hasn't figured out how to organize.
Yes.
You know, it's insane. If you think about the number of freelancers in India, and if we were to get together in any sort of a way, it would be a force, but we're not. So part of this is the freelancer and the platform responsibility of becoming politically influential by getting their act together to do so. In addition to that, I think an awful lot of people are saying it would be great if government regulations were more fulsome, but the only way to do that is to be influential, and the way to be influential is to organize. So I hope in every country what we'll see is a greater organization of freelancing. I hope what we'll see is a greater creation. Do you know there's not a trade association in all of this?
Yes.
It's a $2.5 trillion industry without a trade association. Crazy. I wrote an article about a month ago saying, why are we not organizing? Why are we not more politically active? Why are we not showing what it means to have that many freelancers? I mean, if 60 to 70 million freelancers in the United States are part-time or full-time, crap, that's bigger than the Republican Party. Come on, you guys. So we've got that, and that's certainly the case. A lot of people are saying that government should play more of a role in preparing and certifying freelancers and stuff like that. Well, I think certification has to come from somewhere, but I would prefer not a government certification. What I'd prefer is that a long time ago in Open Assembly, I created this product called the Trusted Talent Partner Survey, Trusted Talent Partner Process. When Open Assembly lost its dough and became part of Fulcrum, they dropped that stuff. I hope it's picked up again at some time, because we've got to provide good data from clients about our freelance platforms so that we know who's doing a great job and who's not doing a great job. But let that be an organic process rather than a process of government involvement, because government also, they kind of screw things up because they're trying to do it to meet the general requirement. And there's not such a general requirement per se in freelancing.
Right. Very well said. And I think we in India at least saw a couple of thoughts around that in terms of what happens if we have governments decide on rules just yesterday, which is something that
let's us do
let's
our
not
job
get into
better.
that.
If we do our job better, they won't create rules, right? Rules are only created when government perceives that it's going in the wrong direction. Well, let's make sure it's in the right direction.
Absolutely. John, I'm mindful of time. It has been a fantastic conversation, and I know you and I can go on for hours and hours together on this topic because it's so close to our hearts. I'm going to quickly get into our rapid fire, which kind of is, I mean, there could be some questions which may require a slightly long answer. That's fine. But getting into the rapid fire, what does John prefer, books or podcasts?
Oh gosh, time with my wife.
So
Having said that, I'm an old timer, so I love books, and I
yeah,
enjoy these podcasts. I think it's so much fun to take the story off the page
sure,
and make it personal. So wonderful.
absolutely,
But again,
absolutely.
number one is wife. Number two
Why?
is kids. Number three is grandkids. Then all the rest of it.
Then everything else. Yeah, perfect. Favorite city you have ever visited?
I live in the best city in the world. New York City is the most extraordinary city. I've been in love with it for 72 years.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. I've been to New York multiple times, and I can't
I know you have.
disagree with that at all. What is the best career advice you have gotten?
Take control of your career. Don't let other people take control of it. And what does take control mean like? It means articulating, just as you said earlier, who are you? What do you bring to the table? Where do you do your best work? What's your vision for your career? What people do you need to connect with and how in order to be successful? And how to give things back. Because at some point, as you and I discussed, that wonderful quote from Jack Lemmon that says, and I always use this, I hope you don't mind. Jack Lemmon, that wonderful comedian from the rom-coms of the 60s and 70s, who said, when you've been successful in a career that you wanted to be successful in, remember to send the elevator back down. So when we think about the earlier data we talked about, which is 70% work, 10% prep, 10% client, 10% administration, I want you to also imagine that 50% of all of that is not only benefiting you, but benefiting colleagues, friends,
Correct.
and collaborators.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think wonderfully said. And we discussed this earlier before the podcast began as well. I think we are more and more moving towards a world where there is no competition but collaboration, and there's going to be a lot more value that people will derive out of that than mindlessly competing with each other. So you're bang on that part.
May I tell you a story about that? I'm trying to remember the name of my professor, but my graduate school was University of Toronto, which is a wonderful, wonderful school. I'm very, very proud to be a grad. And one of my professors, and I can't remember his name, was the founder of mathematical psychology. You'd think that I would remember his name, but I don't remember his name. and he worked an awful lot with the old stuff, the prisoner's dilemma stuff, which is, do you choose to compete or collaborate? And here's what he found, which was fantastic. He said that people that choose to collaborate see others as interested in collaborating. People that see competitors as competitors think that they're defending, not attacking. They think that they're defending against other people that are choosing to be competitors. And independents, that third category, people that are neither collaborating nor competing, kind of want to do their own thing, are doing that because they figure everybody else is doing their own thing. So when you think about that stuff, part of what you've got to do is change your mindset. In order to collaborate, you've got to imagine that others are collaborating or interested in collaborating with you. And once you change your mindset, it's a whole lot easier to see opportunities for collaboration. Because if you don't change that mindset, you're missing out.
Very true. And had I not done this change in terms of my own thought process, probably this podcast wouldn't have existed. So you're absolutely right about the fact that when you are changing the mindset, things do happen.
Yes.
So thank you on that. Any book that has had a really big impact on you?
The ones that I would recommend, our business knowledge is funny because on the one hand, it seems like we're progressing, and on the other hand, it feels like we're rediscovering the same crap over and over again.
Sure.
So I get a little confused by it. But what I really, really liked was stuff, and remember, I'm an old fart, right? So I'm 72 years old. I'm going to be 73. I've been in business for almost 50 years as a consultant, as a professor, and now as a journalist. And I think what I learned more than anything else is that we keep rediscovering that transformation is a series of incremental actions that lead to a change in the S curve, right? What we want is a change in the fundamental. We want innovation. And innovation means leaving the paradigm we're in and moving to the next, whether that's AI or any of that stuff. But in order to do that, we got to get little steps that position us for that us change. So are you, as you're thinking about, your own stuff, and you're thinking about how the world is changing, where are you in that journey? Are you contributing to that journey and moving the S curve to the next? Or are you languishing in one of the spots that isn't moving it forward? Figure out where you are. What I want to do is help freelancing get to the next level. So if you were to ask me what I've been working on for the last 5 years, it's how does freelancing get in the head space as an industry to be worthy of enterprise work. To be worthy of enterprise work, which means the professionalization of a career that for many years has been slightly countercultural, and we've really enjoyed that, right? Well, I grew up during the hippie generation, and I appreciate that, but we had to make a change. I had to cut my hair, we all needed to grow up. And I think that to grow up in freelancing is to understand that the uncertainties need to be reduced and eliminated for big corporates to pick us up in a big way. And until we're picked up in a big way, we continue to be a rounding error in staffing. Staffing, if you think about staffing overall, all of the pay that went into freelancers, not the results that were achieved, but all the pay, I don't know, we're like 4 or 5, maybe we're at $5-10 billion, something like that. Maybe we're even $50 billion, who knows? Total staffing is $495 billion. So even if we're $50 billion, which is a stretch, we're just 10%. So we got a lot of room to grow, But in order to do that growth, we've got to ask ourselves what positions us for success in big corporates, because that actually works all the way down anyway.
True that. And that takes me to the last question. And I know it could be a slightly longer response, but you've done a lot of work on future of work. And there is always this philosophy and the comment that people make that the future of work is already here. What are you bullish about, and what are you concerned about future of work?
I'm going to show you.
AI.
What I did is I went to ChatGPT, my friend, right? and I asked a simple question: What professions will be impacted positively or negatively by AI? And the answer is find your profession on this list and understand the implications. So let me read this stuff. So we talked about blue collar versus white collar stuff. Blue collar stuff is going to be eliminated from a freelancing perspective. The reality is more and more of that stuff will go by bot. I mean, all of the stuff, if what we're saying is, let's use the example that ChatGPT told us: administrative and clerical work, data entry, automation of routine data entry tasks. How many of the Indian freelancers right now are feeding large language models for AI? It's a sucky job, excuse my language. It's low pay, it's temporary, it's not going to be enough to do great things, etc. Well, if that's where you're at, understand that that's dying. AI can handle scheduling, email management, basic administrative tasks. If we start to think about customer service and support, AI chatbots and virtual assistants handle basic inquiries and support. How many people are in contact centers or these folks? I mean, I have wonderful exchanges with people from all over the world, including India. But all that stuff is going to go bot. So you got to ask yourself, is your job going, are the job skills and the solutions that you're providing, are they getting bigger and more fulsome, or are they getting smaller and cheaper? And if they're getting smaller and cheaper, move on. If they're getting larger and more fulsome, that's fantastic. Then how do you position yourself to be front of the line? But so important for people to be thinking, don't think 50 years out. Nobody knows how to do that. But you can go 3 to 5 years out and ask yourself, where will you be? And will you be relevant 5 years from now? And if you're going to be less relevant, now is the time to start thinking about what you're going to do.
Wonderful. I think couldn't have said any better. And that's always the question that I keep asking myself.
Me too.
Where am I going to be next 5 years down the line?
Me too. And I'm 72, so I may be excessively optimistic. I'm assuming I'm still here. This is a good start.
You will, absolutely. There's a lot of work that's still going to be done by...
If only that were the decision fact.
True. Jon, it was wonderful chatting with you. Any parting thoughts for our audience today?
I can't wait to listen to podcast 12.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So to all the audience who are here or who will listen in a bit later on YouTube or other platforms, as you may see this podcast or listen to this podcast, thank you for joining in. Thank you for listening. As we say, future of work is here, and I'm sure you will continue to evolve yourselves and be ready for it. And I'm hopeful that Jon's insights and stories have inspired you to reimagine your careers and roles within the organizations. And to everyone who is working in an organization, you are able to reimagine your organization to allow freelancers to be part of your ecosystem as well.
Yes.
We live in extremely turbulent times. People who can effectively fill roles are becoming scarce. This requires individuals to reinvent themselves and organizations to reimagine the way they approach talent. So, my dear friends, start thinking about skills, learn new ones, unlearn old ones, and find your own niche to move forward. Stay inspired, stay curious, and join us next week for another episode of Career Shifts Podcast. Until then, keep shifting forward and upward. Thank you so much.